Good morning and or afternoon, depending on where in the world you are. Hope everyone's having a great today. Is it Tuesday? I think it's Tuesday.
It is Tuesday.
It is Tuesday. So while we're all getting situated, we'll officially kick off here in just a minute or two. We'll let people get comfortable. But I was actually texting a former coworker of mine that still lives in the Huntsville, Alabama area. And he said he's currently sitting at NASA with another coworker of mine. And I said, funny that I'm actually using them as an example today. I told him we were going to be talking about Bring Me a Rock and how that game is played. And he said, we're actually having that conversation right now. So isn't it funny how the world works?
Or weird.
Weird. There's that word again. You keep using that word.
Well, that's because I think this whole thing is a hallucination of yours. So that every corner turns to the same subject.
It kind of does. It kind of does. Which is, those of us SharePoint veterans, it's all about questions. Even if you're just building a document library, there are a lot of questions involved.
And people don't like questions when you're a consultant. They just want answers.
Yeah. Because our answer is usually it depends, and then we ask another question. So I think they get uncomfortable because we're constantly grilling them. But in the end,
true.
It's worth it. So it looks like we still got people joining. I don't know about the rest of the world. You're kind of up further north. What kind of weather you got happening in the Ohio area? Is it spring yet?
Today it's spring-ish. I mean, it's kind of gray, but it's not super cold. So it feels more fallish than springish at the moment, though.
Dreary.
Because it's rainy and gray.
Oh, don't you love it? Don't you love it? We had our showers over the weekend. Friday it was 80 degrees. Then the weekend it got down into 50. It was disgusting. And now we're hard at work, and it's going to be 80 or 70, I think, this week. So
I prefer from like the mid 50s to like the low 70s.
Brr.
Yeah, I prefer that, and I know that's an oddity, but
yeah, I want to roast.
Yeah,
Bring on
usually
90.
about this time, people in the Ohio area are, pretty ready for summer.
yeah, for sure. All right, well, it looks like numbers are kind of holding steady here for a few seconds. And it looks like it's 2 minutes after. So welcome, everybody, to the Joy of SharePoint webinar series. I have with me Stephen Wilson, one of my cohorts here at Pate Group. He was foolish enough to mention to me yesterday that he didn't get an official invitation from me to join the webinar. So he got that this morning, and here he is.
Yeah, that was really dumb of me. I should know better.
And you're like, oh, you're bored? Here, come on, work.
Well, because I know what it means when you bring it up. Like when you're like, so my webinar is tomorrow. Really? How interesting. And then I know what's going to happen next.
Change the subject, so here you are. But Stephen, you and I do some similar things, and we have similar points of view, but I think we make a good team because I tend to be maybe a little more foolishly optimistic sometimes.
Joyful.
I gotta live up to the name. And you need a good balance of personalities when you're approaching the game Bring Me a Rock. And for those of you, that aren't familiar with this, so I started out my IT career in Huntsville, Alabama, and some of you know Alabama, they have information technology in Alabama. We do. We're actually one of the home bases for NASA at the Space and Rocket Center, Redstone Arsenal. We got the Space and Rocket Center. Werner von Braun started the space race there. So NASA's a big player. I started working in the defense industry, and one of the contractors we worked with a lot was NASA. And I learned this phrase when we started trying to get requirements for our SharePoint 2010 environment. We don't call it requirements gathering, we call it Bring Me a Rock. And that comes from moon rocks, right? It's like you go to a group and you have this conversation, and it's a big back and forth. You ever have a big back and forth requirements gathering conversation, Stephen?
Yeah, that's pretty. Yeah, it happens fairly often.
Fairly often, probably, if not daily, at least weekly. Let me see here. And it usually something kicks off like this. You're minding your own business, whether you're in your office, the server room, your desk, or even just at lunch. A phone rings or an email comes in, and either a particular team or a department suddenly needs something, or the boss has a new idea and has decided that we're going to do a new project. We love it when the boss has new ideas, right? Yes, we love it. So, and they're the hardest one to get requirements out of. I have learned that. If any of my bosses are on the phone, I apologize. I'm sure you're the exception to this rule. But it's harder to press your boss for answers sometimes.
Well, and you know why they're not answering. A lot of times they're not answering because, A, they think they're in your head.
Sure.
And B, they're very busy. But
yes,
the customers are the same way.
They're busy. We're all busy. It's a true story.
Exactly.
So I just launched a poll. If you haven't seen that on the screen, just curious what our general reaction is when we know we're about to do some requirements gathering. And so far I'm seeing my two favorite answers are the ones that are the most popular. Okay, and the 9-10% of you that are answering with shoot me now, bless your honesty, it's appreciated.
I feel like, I mean, looking at this list, I don't know what you think your two favorite answers are, but I know what I think your two favorite answers are.
Yes, and what are they?
Well, I think that I'm going to need more coffee is pretty much your response to anything. If I said I'm going to call a cab, you would be like, I need more coffee.
Cabs are hard.
And then I think your other response is, I love a challenge, bring it.
You are correct, sir.
Yeah.
Now, halfway into it, I might drop down to that first one, shoot me now. Sometimes we have those moments. But then you give me more coffee and I'm okay again. Okay, so I'm going to close this out here in a second. Stephen, which one's yours?
I'm not really sure because I know it has to be done, and so like I would say I'll do it, but I won't like it. But it's not really true. I think my big thing is it depends on how the customer approaches it. So a lot of times my reaction is shoot me now. And it's because like I will get a question from a customer that will say something like, well, it's not even a question, it's a statement like, I need a library. And then they'll maybe say, can you do that for me? And that's where I'm like, shoot me now, because I know that's all the thought they want to put into it.
Sure. And is it really a library, or is it a site, or is it something else?
Exactly. And I'll have to chase them to the name of it. What are they going to do with it? And so that's where the shoot me now comes from, because I know the requirements gathering is necessary, but part of it is convincing them that it's necessary.
Yes, and that's where it starts, right? The game is afoot at that point. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Thank you so much, guys, for answering that. We should go back to our slides. So the question has been asked, and off we go to that first of many meetings. So the first one is when you sit down and you just, maybe introductions are made, you have a little bit of a conversation, and pretty much what you typically get out of the team is, we know we need something, right? If you're at NASA, you know we need a rock. That may be an easy way to share and work on files, or collaboration, task tracking. We need fewer emails. Hallelujah. We need fewer emails in this world. I've got collaboration on here twice, mostly because it's an overused word. It's a buzzword at the moment. You hear it all the time, or we need notifications. So they need something, right? And these, to the person that's in need, they almost sometimes don't even think more needs to be said. We need a way to track our tasks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you go and you start with that second part. Okay, what kind of tasks? Where are the tasks kept? Is this for your team, or are these people outside of your team? Do you want to track it in SharePoint? Do you have SharePoint? Where do you need to track? Oh, you need fewer emails. So do you use Skype? Do you use Slack? Do you use Teams? Fewer emails from one particular group or just in general, right? Questions, questions, questions. And sometimes you start to get this look from the people on the other side of the table that might possibly, if I get my thing to click, resemble this. You ever seen this expression in a meeting?
Yeah. For me, the one that's worse about this is workflows.
Yes, they're massive. There's no such thing as a simple workflow.
Well, and they say, we just need a workflow to notify people when the document has come into the library.
Yeah.
And so, that's a simple workflow, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep. Because my first thing is, that sounds like an alert to me.
There you go.
So, but that is a type of workflow. And we do have a tendency, I think, sometimes to presume that we know what they mean just off the bat. I'm looking at my tools. I wish there were, I should have built this in. If you ever had a conversation with someone in IT and before you finished explaining what you do, oh, yeah, okay, I'll get that to you here in a bit. They presume to know the answer before the question's even finished being asked.
Or, the workflow that we were just talking about. Like you said, it seems like an alert, but that's a type of workflow. But it's simple. Every time a document comes into this library, I need an email sent to Linda.
Yes.
But Linda's on vacation next week.
Oh, so sometimes it doesn't go to Linda.
Sometimes. But that's rare.
But that's rare. But it happens. So when Linda's on vacation, who would fill in for her?
That would probably be Dave. Probably.
Probably? Okay, so let's put Dave in here too. So can Dave know about it even when Linda is in the office?
He can, but he hates getting all the emails.
Oh, I see. I see. So what Stephen has just ventured into is officially the kickoff of Bring Me a Rock. And at NASA, the way it goes is, all right, so you need a rock, but you don't know how big, you don't know how heavy, you don't know what color, you don't know what shape. So just bring me a rock. Okay, so you go get one, and maybe it's the size of a baseball, and you bring it back, and you go, okay, here's a rock, and they go, that's too small. It needs to be bigger. Okay, so here's a rock, too small, make it bigger. What about the color? Do you like the color? It's kind of this shiny gray. No, that's too dark. It needs to be lighter. Okay, it needs to be lighter. And you just start going back and forth with try this, try this. It's almost like being at the optometrist's, 1 or 2, 2 or 3, 4 or 7. And you go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This is where we start to get into the shoot me now mentality. It's frustrating. The users start getting frustrated because they keep having to go back and look and no, that's not right. Why aren't you understanding? I've answered your questions. You're not giving me what I need. So they start getting frustrated. And, us IT folks kind of have a doctor mentality, I think, sometimes, where it's like, we know better than the user knows, so we're getting frustrated with them. They don't understand it. They don't get it. This is really what they need. Why won't they listen to me? So how do we stop that process? Oh, that's work. So
really, it can't be that hard. We can't be the first people to ask for this.
But you're the first people in your company. And we all know companies have different cultures. different personalities, security requirements, processes, right? Everybody's unique. We're snowflakes. None of us are the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is my number one piece of advice, and usually the scariest piece of advice, depending on your IT personality. Have a real conversation. Now, Stephen, you once confessed that you like interacting with users, but sometimes they scare you.
They do. They do.
But that conversation is where we can start to humanize the process, help them see that we're on their side. Because sometimes it's IT versus the business, and that's a sad situation to be in, because we are there. I'm going to say something that I've gotten dirty looks for before. We're there to help our organization. We are a service provider inside of our companies. And some of us are better at these conversations than others. If sitting down and interacting and having these one-on-one personal conversations is not for you, find a friend. There's somebody in your department or on your team that can kind of help be that liaison. And don't presume you know what they need. Ask the questions. Even if it seems completely unrelated to task tracking, ask questions. Ask what kind of activities are behind the tasks. Ask who's involved with the tasks. Make sure that there's no gotchas lurking in the background that you couldn't easily ferret out at this point. Framing the picture to see what's happening before and what happens after can help make sure we're getting this target piece kind of scoped in before we start building something out, have to scrap it and start over. And then keywords or buzzwords, whichever you prefer. I tend to call them buzzwords. What's your favorite SharePoint buzzword, Stephen?
Collaborate.
Yeah, that's mine too. We need to collaborate. Where's my screen? So when you say collaborate, I think that's down kind of low on the list. What does it mean? Does it mean work on a document together at the same time? Does it mean a workflow? So it starts with Bob, then it moves to Linda, and then it goes to Dave, and then Stephen gives the final approval? Does it mean chat? A place where we can chat while we work on a document together? What's a notification? Is it a text? Is it an email? Is it an icon on your SharePoint mobile app? Is messaging the same as a notification, or is it an email? Do you need a group inbox, or does it go to individuals? Is there a distribution list or an Office 365 group that gets that email? Who are we sharing with? Internally? Is it external? Is it a combination? How do we share? Do we want to share with an email, or maybe we're inviting these people into a Teams channel? Hey, there's so many questions you can ask. I actually did once tell a point of contact, and we became pretty good friends, so it wasn't like I was just being completely rude. He kept saying, collaborate, we want to collaborate. The team needs to collaborate. We want to collaborate with that team. And I did tell him, I was like, Doug, I love you, man, but if you say collaborate one more time, you're going to have to go stand in the corner. I need you to find a different word and substitute it so we can start digging into what that means to you.
And that's why collaborate is my favorite buzzword, because sometimes I think it is the word that they tripped over on the way to SharePoint.
Oh, absolutely.
Like up to that point, they were thinking like people. They were saying like, oh, I'll send him an email, or I will send him a text message, or I will, catch him on Slack. But once they start to get into the SharePoint world, they just say, we want to collaborate. And at that point, it's hard to get them to focus, I guess, is maybe, to get them to decide how that is going to work. And so when they say the word collaborate, a lot of times that's when I realize, like, oh, okay, they haven't really thought this through as a people process. They're still thinking of it as a computer process. And
or even a generic, it's almost a generic word anymore, where you can just take collaborate out, say, well, we need to do something with the finance team.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's absolutely a process. It's an action word. But man, and Office 365 gives us a lot of ways to do this. I was on a client site once, and one lady, she said, it's just too many options. I feel overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where to start. And that's 150% valid, maybe more. That's valid. There's a lot of options out there. And it's making these conversations that much more important. Because right now, today, Stephen, if I wanted to get in touch with you, I could hit you on Skype. I could hit you on Teams. I could send you an email. I could probably think of some other ways to do it. I could write a letter and send it to the corporate office, and someone would eventually get it to you, right? There's a lot of...
You could have Olivera help hunt me down.
Yes. She's probably on here listening going, don't get me involved. I do enough of that already.
Well, but you know how, like, you send her a message and then, you know, she will find me eventually. Like, she knows, you know, I'm working on something else at the moment, but, you know, she'll pounce as soon as my icon turns yellow or green instead of yellow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one word I think that comes up a lot that we need to step back and really pay attention to is if a user throws in the word easy. That's almost a warning word. We need an easy way to fill in the blank. So if they're needing to throw in that word easy, that's probably a good time if you're sitting in a room and pay attention. I'm serious. If you're consultants out there or if you're a liaison to your business, close your laptop. When you hear this inconceivable, yay, sorry, I got a question come in. I love that someone's recognizing my Princess Bride picture. If a client, a customer, a business member says they need something that's easy or easier, close your laptop, put your pen down, make eye contact, because now is the time to communicate and connect with them one-on-one and find out what's not easy right now, what's hard, what's difficult, what is cumbersome, what is frustrating you. Because if they need an easy way to collaborate, then there's something that's not easy going on. That's a good time to start making a friend on this other business team. Because if you can find out what that pain point is right now and find a way to solve it, you're going to have a win. You're absolutely going to have a win. And that's critical, especially if you're in a culture where it's almost IT versus the business, because we want to change that, right? We got really awesome tools inside of Office 365 that we can offer our business partners. There are amazing things we can do right now. Now's the time to start making friends. That opens the door for those wins. What would you add to that, Stephen? You've been doing this a long time too.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that this page reminds me of is that, you know, like I said, you get the customer who says, we can't be the first person to ask for this. You know, there are at least, you know, 6 or 7 ways listed on this page to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so sort of the fallacy that there is a right way, you know, that any of these things are locked in stone. You know, you're starting off a process and like, well, then it has to send an email. You know, well, it doesn't. It could send a text. It could send a message through Teams. It could send a tweet. You know, it doesn't have to be one way. And even when you're working with somebody on the other side, they may think, oh, okay, this is it. I know what it has to do. You know, it has to send a text message.
Mm-hmm.
That may just be what's best for them, you know, or for their team. But, you know, maybe for everybody else, it's better for it to be an email or a tweet or whatever. And so the idea that there is like a definitive right way for every situation, I think is the thing that I try not to get caught at this stage and like pin them down and say, well, what do you want it to do? Do you want it to be an email? Do you want it to be a text? I will, you know, put a pin in something. I will say, okay, well, for right now, let's say we're going to send an email, you know, but keep going with the discussion because there may be another way that emerges.
And I'll say this about email, and sometimes it's kind of, I hope I'm not saying this the wrong way, but generational. Comfort level is going to be very important. So we want to make sure whatever we're building, that it's a tool that the people using it are comfortable with. Some may still just be comfortable with email. I know me personally, if my Teams notification goes off, I'm on it like within moments, typically. If it's an email, okay, I'll get to that when I'm done doing whatever it is I'm doing. We don't all work that way, but those are more good questions to start having in this conversation. You might even open doors and build something in that this team didn't know was possible, especially with Flow now. With Flow, you could have it reach out in a variety of ways.
Exactly. And sometimes that responsiveness, like, it seems like a good thing, like what you just said, like, you know, well, if people will respond faster to a notification in Teams, that's better. But is it? I mean, you've got a busy team. Do you want to interrupt them every 10 minutes? You know, so it may be better to send an email, even if the group that you're talking about responds faster to Teams messages. Maybe you don't want them to respond faster. Maybe you really just want them to be notified and then schedule it into their day. But they don't need to drop everything the second it hits. Right.
And that's one thing, like, so I'm currently working on a project that when I kick off that client's VPN, everything else on my computer dies. So,
yeah, I know exactly the situation you're talking about.
So I'm actually getting to where I have stolen my fiance's laptop so I can keep it going. But I can get to my team, so I can get stuff like that going, but I can't respond very quickly to email at the moment. But it's amazing how much work you can get done if you don't feel like you must respond instantaneously. So that's a good thing to bring up with our team. How distracting should this be? If this is just an FYI for them, maybe let's just stick to email. So as we're starting to get into these conversations, keep in mind that sometimes it can be dangerous to go alone. And I'm going to wait and see who's my first responder that gets this reference. So take a friend, right? Take somebody with you, recruit a colleague to go with you and help with this conversation. Sad but true, the number one thing I thought of when I started building this slide is my mom was very, very ill last year, and I went to a lot of surgeons and doctor's appointments with her, mostly because she wasn't in any condition to really hear everything that was going on. So she needed somebody else to make sure she didn't miss anything, and to make sure they understood the questions for her. So the same thing happens in businesses, especially if it's you against an entire department. They might have 6 or 7 people in the room and it's just you. It's dangerous to go alone. Here, take this, right? Find a friend that's good at listening, or if you're the listener, you're not good at engaging in those conversations, find your good talker. Find someone that's engaging. Oh, I like this. I prefer to pick someone I don't like to go with me, then I can blame them if it blows up. Ooh, that's devious. That is so devious. But it's a valid point. No, but it's good to have someone that can be your backup, that can help you listen, offer different points of view, maybe ask questions you're not going to think to ask, or can maybe even serve as that liaison so you can get back and do the nitty-gritty technical, and they can kind of help smooth that interaction.
I am now suddenly suspicious of why you always ask me to do these with you.
Because you're my backup.
And because you can blame me if it goes poorly.
That wasn't my idea. That was That was an offered suggestion in the question panel, and I think it's genius. That's when you know you're in an interesting work environment. Who can I take with me to blame?
Whose back needs stabbing?
Well, it's like, I'm going to give our Ryan a pat on the back. Yeah, Ryan is our designer.
Uh-huh.
And I've noticed he doesn't always like to lead the conversations. It depends on who it's with.
Uh-huh.
But man, he's great to listen in and offer up. And if there's a concern, he's right there to address it. He's really good at talking, at listening, and at showing people, oh yeah, this is okay. This is easy here. It makes a big difference.
And Ryan's never afraid to ask somebody to come and tag in. Like if he knows that it's a topic he's not super comfortable with, he'll come to you and he'll say, like, hey, I have a call with a customer. It's going to be about an hour long. They want to talk about this. Can you come along? Because I know that's something that you know more about than I do.
Yeah.
And he's there for his input and he's there to listen, but he'll let you lead the conversation if you know more about the subject than he does.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that is another good point that I did not put on the slide, but especially if you're new to requirements gathering or you're uncomfortable with it, I want to tell you this right now, especially if you're a consultant out there, don't be afraid to not know something. If they're asking you a question and you just don't know, it's okay to pause a minute and say, I'm not sure, but let me find out.
And don't be defensive about it. Don't be like, my boss made me come here by myself, or, I'm the only server here today. Just say, I'm not sure. Let me look into that.
Yes, absolutely. Because you don't want to back yourself in the corner and try to fake something. Sometimes you can fake some confidence sometimes walking into a room full of people you don't know or you're not familiar with. But in this product stack we work with, you can't know it all. It's just not feasible. And if someone says they do, they're lying. Go find a different consultant if they tell you they know everything there is to know about Office 365.
I can't tell you how much in the last year I've been smacked by somebody with an email that came out like the day before I got there.
Really?
Yes, where like I say something that I know was true last week, and they will literally like pull out a link from yesterday where Microsoft, sent out a new announcement and said, that this is going to happen now. Happened to me so much in the last year.
And you go, okay, that's when you bring up the slide that says Office 365 is an evergreen service. Mm-hmm. Ever-changing, ever-growing.
And now they're down to subtle things. At one point they were changing big stuff. Mm-hmm. But now it's, when you create this, it will send an email. Until next Tuesday. And now then they're not going to send the email anymore. Sorry, my bad.
Well, you remember back in the day, task lists automatically sent a notification to someone who a task was assigned to. And then I think in 2013, they changed that to where it did not happen automatically.
Yep.
And it was like, but if you go back and click this button, it'll happen. I do want to bring up, Ruth brought up a really, really, really good point. As an independent SharePoint consultant, one does not have the benefit to have a backup. So she's the Lone Ranger out there. It's good to have a list of questions in advance. That is very, very true. It keeps you consistent. It gives you something you can stay on if your customer kind of starts talking in different directions, right? You can come back to it, check it off as you go, because it is an interview, right? It legitimately is an interview you're having with these people to meet their need. And I think that's something else to keep in mind too. We are trying to meet a need and make their life better. So speaking of a list of questions, this is literally just a few that I wrote down. There's way more out there to it, but I like to ask the perfect world question. And this used to make one of my bosses back before I was with Pay Group This would make them nervous. But I always say, okay, in a perfect world, how does this work? What would the result be? If I could give you perfection, which I can't, right? But I'm going to do my best to get you really, really close. What would perfect look like? How would it impact your day? How would it impact the other people that are involved in the process? That gives them hope, and that gives them thinking about things that maybe they haven't thought of before. Oh, well, if I could have anything I wanted, it would do this, right? And that's when you start going making your priorities out of that perfection list. What are they doing right now? This whole task tracking thing that needs a workflow. What are they using right now today? What does that process look like? Write it down, right? Document it. This is what we're doing on April the 24th, 2018. What is working really well, right? What pieces of it are great and what pieces of it are awful? So when you start seeing where we are, what we need to make sure we keep working, because you don't want to break what works. If you break what works, you're done. And then you fix what doesn't work. You make it better and you improve. And so today, you need to do these things, this process. But what's it going to look like a year from now? What's it going to look like 3 years from now? Because if you start planning for what's coming in the future, you make sure what you do is agile and is scalable. Agree or disagree, Stephen?
I may be out on the edge of this one, but this is the one where I try to make sure that none of us in the room are afraid to let this whole thing fall apart right here. Because when you ask that question, in a perfect world, how would this work? And they maybe sometimes are really thinking about it for the first time.
Yes.
Sometimes this spirals out of control. And they will realize this is not a technology question.
Yeah.
This is not something that I can fix with a script or a workflow because the system is too chaotic. Because if they can't wrap their hands around, like a list of A/B questions to make this work, they either have to implement it, by hand. It's got to go to, a committee or something to make the decisions, or they have to fix the whole process, even the non-technical parts. They have to rethink how they're doing it. The only example I had a customer one time that they came to me and they said, we have these projects, and the project teams are usually 3 to 5 people, and we create a library, and we put folders in the library, and then we do permissions based on who's in the project team.
Right. And
they're like, and so we have a ton of folders out there, each with individual permissions. We create it and we put 3 people in that folder's permissions. How do we fix that? Because we know that we have made a mess of our permissions. And so everybody who's listening to this right now, if you're familiar with SharePoint permission, you're probably thinking, oh, you should do groups and you should do this and you should do that. But if they are really ad hoc teams, every time the team is different. So you can't say there are 10 combinations or there are 5 combinations. Because if there are 5 combinations, you can create, groups. You can create team 1, team 2, team 3, team 4, team 5. But if it's really chaotic every time, there is no solution to that problem. You have to do individual permissions every time, or create an individual group every time. And you only get 10,000 of them.
Oh, is that all?
That's all. But I mean, really, there's not a whole lot of virtue in creating 10,000 groups. If it really is individual, then individual permissions are just as good.
much.
So, so they had to go back and rethink how they were doing it. And I was like, if you could put some order together as to who the team is, you've got a finite number of people. There are a finite number of combinations there. And if you can figure out any kind of pattern, then we can maybe solve for that pattern. But if it's literally chaos every time, there is no technological fix. You have to do exactly what you're doing now.
And that's a hard pill to swallow. Sometimes if you can get people away from the idea of having to have rigid security, sometimes you can't. I grew up in the defense industry, right? So permissions and security is a huge deal in my mind. But so is common sense and being reasonable. So if it's not a breach of security for team A and team B and team C to see the same stuff, then why are we getting heartburn on security, right? Organize it, but that doesn't mean you have to secure it. And I think if you approach that in a diplomatic way, you may have a chance of kind of getting people to reconsider that. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes nope, has to be that way. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So. And that's what, so there is a fix, but the fix is to look into the problem more deeply. It's not a technical fix. It is an actual fix of the whole framing of the question.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, and that's real work.
Cultural changes.
Training can help with some of that. Communication can help with some of that. If you're ever sitting down in a meeting and you realize that this team is going to be changing something drastically for their whole department, make sure that people know what's going to be happening and that there's communication ahead of time, because nobody appreciates coming into work on a Monday and things are completely different. Nobody likes that. It's hard to win when the first thing you've done is almost kind of offended your audience. What about organizations that are afraid of the cloud? Been there, government. Yeah, government hates the cloud. Actually, 5 years ago, government hated the cloud. There's been an ease and a softening of that. I think the number one way you can help an organization that's afraid of going to the cloud is just information. Microsoft publishes a lot of information on uptime numbers, availability numbers, SLA numbers. You can find good information on how secure that content is, right? Because it's not just sitting in a warehouse that somebody could go break into and steal that organization's server, right? And I think there's almost a fear of that, even though we know it's not rational. That's kind of one of those fears, because that data is shredded and spread out around the globe. So it is extremely secure.
And I've had customers who have grilled me on like the possibilities, like what happens if the cloud goes down. And then when I flip the question around, I'm like, well, what happens if your farm goes down here? They're like, well, there's nothing we can do if it's down. Well, I mean, you're basically asking what happens if the internet goes down.
Right.
You know,
if that happens, we're all in trouble.
Exactly. And so, there's no backup internet that we can switch to.
Yeah.
So they sometimes look at the cloud with a lot more suspicion than they do on premise.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite things that I ever saw was this little comic that said server room, and this guy was pulling the server room door tag off and putting cloud sign on. Right? Because honestly, the cloud, so let's say I work in Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? And my company is based in Cincinnati, and we have an on-premise installation of SharePoint. That's cloud to me, because I cannot go put my hand on that server. I cannot go touch that data. I can get to it through the interwebs. That's cloud, right? It's just data being stored somewhere else.
Yep.
Ruth's really good point here. Going hybrid may help with that. So if you have segments of super sensitive information that just the idea of it being a Microsoft server somewhere else, it just starts to give you a panic attack. Keep that on-prem. Take your more internal, less sensitive, non-classified content, maybe move that off. Maybe take a baby step, move that offline, or not offline, but off-prem into the cloud. Get your toes in the water, see how it feels. Going to OneDrive could be a good step for that, right? Instead of using our desktop to dump our documents and our personal items in, go to OneDrive. Use that. It's cloud. It's what used to be our My Sites, right? Kind of get used to the idea of having that with you wherever you go. You'll get completely spoiled rotten if you know everything you dumped into your OneDrive. You can now get to on your phone when you're at the dentist's office instead of having to wait to get back to your computer to find that file that your boss needs. Right? Little steps like that can help ease that transition.
And sometimes you can do the exact opposite. You know, if you're a very small company and you don't have a lot of resources, you don't have a dev farm, a staging farm, production farm, but you rely heavily on SQL reporting services to query internal databases. You know, you can set up like Power BI and all that with like a tunnel back into your system, but it may not be worth it right now. You know, maybe you just want to keep those files locally, you know, in the SQL servers and have SSRS running someplace locally. But then all your, you know, document libraries and all that stuff, that goes out to the cloud.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you don't have a lot of redundancy there. You know, you don't have, you know, 3 SharePoint farms, and you don't have virtual backups and everything else. So maybe the data in SharePoint is better off in the cloud because it's better protected than you can do on premise.
You know, we're really on that cusp. When I was working hand in hand with NASA a lot, Department of Defense and manufacturing stuff, I mean, the idea of cloud was far-fetched. You just roll your eyes and go, keep trying, Microsoft. It's never going to happen, never going to happen, never going to happen. And now I sit and I look back, I'm like, holy moly, it's happening. They're doing it. But they've really had to prove a lot to be able to get to where they are. And these conversations, they may go round and round. They may not seem to go anywhere for a little while. But just planting the seed and giving that information can start to yield results. Question here, Robert. Our company is 100% on-prem SharePoint. What about on-prem SharePoint? You know, it's still 100% valid. On-prem's not going anywhere right now. You know, 2019 is not too far away. Modern's going to be coming in the 2019 environment, so you're going to get some of that goodness that hasn't been coming. Oh, what about Power Apps for on-prem SharePoint? Stephen?
What about Power Apps?
Compatible with on-prem SharePoint?
It can be. I mean, it takes a little bit of sort of hybridization. You know, and you can also use Microsoft Forms, or not Forms, Flow.
Flow.
You know. So you can do that. You do have to do a little bit of work because, you know, getting it to authenticate through, you may have to set up Azure AD and all that stuff. So it's not a casual process, but it can be done. If you really need to keep your stuff on-prem, though, I think that Microsoft's going to probably shave the edges off of some of that stuff when they come out with the next quote-unquote version of SharePoint. Mm-hmm. Because that's what they did. You know, between 2013 and 2016, one of the things they did was make hybrid make a little more sense. It was quite difficult to set up in 2013 because you had to kind of dig into a lot of PowerShell and you had to do a lot of things that were kind of afterthoughts because the hybrid wasn't really a thing when SharePoint 2013 came out. Well, when 2016 came out, they kind of designed it with that possibility in mind. And so I think they'll come out with something like that for 2019, or whatever they're going to call it, SharePoint Ultimate. You know, but I think that, you know, they'll make that sort of thing easier in the future. And both Power Apps and Flow are actually probably changing faster than SharePoint is.
Yeah, definitely.
So it is a possibility, but if I had SharePoint 2016 right now, I would be doing a lot of analysis on anything like involving workflows, anything involving like InfoPath forms or something like that. I would want to make sure that, you know, I was doing something that was as future-proof as I could make it without having to pour a ton of extra time into, you know, connecting my farm to a bunch of things for like 2 workflows that do minor things.
Mm-hmm. The common sense principle.
Yeah. You know, there is a little bit of diminishing return to all the work of setting up the hybrid stuff so that you can do something that you could have done, you know, in 10 minutes with SharePoint Designer, but you're like, no, I want to do it in you know, Flow so that it's future proof. Well, if it took you 10 minutes, you know, wait until you're moving to a platform that is tied to Flow instead of assuming that one day you're absolutely positively going to have to move to Flow like overnight.
Now, when you quote that 10-minute time frame for SharePoint Designer, are you counting in the number of times it's going to crash and you have to restart it?
Yeah, actually, because because it's something, you know, basically where you could do it with an alert, but instead you want to make sure that people get it, and if they're going to turn it off, they have to block it in Outlook.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay. So, honestly, I'm trying to think. My nutshell, my recap for this is: don't be afraid to have those conversations and ask these questions, right? And you'll probably, if you've done this more than once or twice, you've probably got some questions that you know work well inside your organization. Don't be shy. Don't be hesitant. Reach out to your people. Ask them in questions. Engage. Watch out for those buzzwords, especially if they need something easy. That's a danger word. It means something right now is broken and it's a good chance for you to fix it. If anyone has any questions, I'm going to go ahead and go to my thank you for coming slide. I do appreciate you guys joining in on the conversations. I really appreciate the comments, and I'm sad to say nobody chimed in with my "it's dangerous to go alone" clue. That was from The Legend of Zelda. Remember when he would go, Link would go and say, "It's dangerous to go alone. Here, take this." And she'd give him a sword. Or a
yeah, but you had the guy tied to the chair.
I know, but there was one of those too in the slide.
Well, I'm saying you had the guy tied to the chair.
Oh yeah. Well, that's what you were taking. Instead of a sword, you're hijacking somebody to go to your meeting with you.
Yep.
So, thank you again. If you guys have any questions, if you want to reach out, you can reach out to me on Twitter at Joy of SharePoint. You can ask a question here. It's not quite the full hour, so maybe you can get a little bit more time to eat. Oh, and apparently, Stephen, we're entertaining. Thank you, Candace. We try to inform and entertain. Yeah, we're here for you guys. We appreciate you joining in.
Tip your waiters.
That's right. Oh, thank you guys. We appreciate you. Stephen, thank you for joining with me today.
You're quite welcome. Your plan to blame me when it all fell apart has gone horribly wrong.
Yeah, just wait till that next time that invitation comes through. You're like,
I'm onto your game now.
No, I didn't get a cocktail recipe from you, though.
Not this time. You didn't ask.
Planning anything about Power Apps in the near future? Anything about Power Apps in the near future?
Are they asking if you're planning on doing a presentation?
Well, I might be thinking about it now, Stephen.
Why are you talking to me about this?
Because you've done way more Power Apps than I have.
I am out of town that week.
Oh, So, Robert, stay tuned to both the Pate Group Twitter account and Joy of SharePoint, and I'll see if I can't wrangle Stephen and probably Stephanie.
Emphasis on Joy of SharePoint.
Uh-huh. That means I'm in charge.
Yeah.
I bet we can get Stephanie on too. She actually likes doing these.
It's just finding a time when she can.
I know. She's so crazy busy. But yeah. Keep in touch, Robert. We will see about getting a Power Apps webinar out there. I love having requests. It's less thinking I have to do. All right. Any other questions out there? Observations? Fun facts? If not, I'll give it a minute or two and we'll go ahead and close up shop for the day. All righty. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and shut her down. Thank you again, guys. Appreciate you all being here. Thanks for the interaction. And we'll talk to you in about a month or sooner if you find me on Twitter. Bye, Stephen.
Bye.
Bye.